Yeah. Man, I can't wait to sit down, talk about the race today. Man, that was a pretty decent race. A lot of interesting strategy. And, I think best team, best car, at the end of the race, best strategy, got the win. I thought it was a pretty decent race. I don't know what you could really complain about. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. First road course race of the season is in the books, and it was kind of your typical road course race. A lot of strategy came into play, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today in today's relatively short Out of the Groove episode is going to be the strategy that we saw. We saw strategy at the end of both Stage 1 and Stage 2, where drivers would choose to pit earlier so that they could get track position on the ensuing restart. And that was all fine and good. I thought it was a little interesting how we saw multiple times how Truex or Harvick really seemed to just ignore the fact that they could get a stage point or a playoff point more important than anything, and instead they favored that in hopes of, I guess, getting better track position going for the win. But I didn't understand because they were doing this at the end of Stage 1, and I thought, we're lap 25 out of 110. Who cares about this one stage? So I'm a little surprised that they passed on points for the playoffs. We've seen playoff points be very important in the past, so I thought that was interesting. But as a whole, this was a race that was covered in strategy. In pit strategy, we had drivers splitting up stages, especially when it came to Stage 3. You had some drivers trying to split the stage in half, other drivers pit with about 40 laps to go in hopes that a caution or something would come out. That caution never did. So at the end of the day, it all came down to the fact that Cole Pearn and Martin Truex Jr.'s team were basically able to sucker Rodney Childers and Kevin Harvick's team into taking a less optimal pitch strategy. That was honestly probably the highlight of the race, and it was something we don't really see very often. We see drivers like under caution will like fake going to pit road, but nobody really ever falls for that. This was a case of some radio and some other trickery that actually worked and was effective. Martin Truex Jr. might win that race regardless, even if Harvick doesn't fall for this pit strategy, but this was, that was very interesting, and it definitely put Harvick at a disadvantage, especially since the yellow flag did not come out. And that was basically the story of this race. Not a lot of cautions, a good amount of passing, a lot of comers and goers with those different pit strategies. At the end of the day, Martin Truex Jr. won the race by about 12 seconds or so, so it was all pit strategy that got him that track position and got him that lead, and that was honestly the most interesting and the most intriguing part of the race. Not a lot of spins. I know Bubba Wallace looped it and spun out at one point in turn 11. A couple cars, got off track a little bit, but we didn't see too many, we didn't really see any wrecks. But that's normal for a road course, especially at Sonoma. You don't really see that many big pileups. That's pretty unusual to see. We had some technical issues. Ryan Blaney lost his power steering, and that resulted in what had to have just been torment for about 60 or 70 laps there. McMurray had an electrical or a fuel pump, something issue that knocked him out of the race, unfortunately, a little bit early. And the biggest story was that AJ Allmendinger missed a shift at one point in the race pretty early on and forced him to the garage. AJ Allmendinger, I had him as one of my top underdogs. A lot of people, AJ Allmendinger is one of the closest things we have to a true road course ringer these days in the Cup Series that actually has a chance of winning. And so, we saw Allmendinger run in the top 5 until that incident and looked like he had one of the top 2 or 3 cars there. Obviously one of the top 2 or 3 drivers at this racetrack. So for him to miss a shift, very uncharacteristic of him, but that was honestly pretty disappointing. That was the biggest kind of like plot twist of the race. Although, like I mentioned on my episode last week, we've seen Allmendinger and team kind of choke away this race in years past. They always lead laps at Sonoma, but they never have the finishes to show for it the last few years. This is another example of, I think they just put too much pressure on themselves as a team for this one race, and it just bites them sometimes. Moving on towards the end of the race, after Martin Truex Jr. team were able to kind of, trick Kevin Harvick into pitting in a not the most optimal situation, Truex then pit with about 30 laps to go, so he had about 10 lap fresher tires than Harvick at that point. And with those fresher tires, it was not too difficult for him to run down the 4 car, retake the lead. Had a caution flag come out, that would have been very interesting to see how people played the pit strategy. That could have led to some very dramatic and possibly chaotic restarts, but luckily for Truex and for that 78 team, that never came into play. Harvick, Boyer, a few other cars that were in the top 5 actually pit again with less than 20 laps to go to take advantage possibly of a caution coming out, but again, that caution never came out, so those teams were never able to reap those benefits. So at the end of the day, this was definitely the heaviest strategy race of 2018. And it's pretty typical for road courses to have strategy. This is one of those races where it felt like people were layering new strategies on top of existing strategies. It's like one of those video games where it's like the butterfly effect, where it's like a David Cage game or like a Telltale game. You know, it's one of those games where every choice leads to a new choice, leads to a new choice. It felt like teams were just making up new strategies as they went along, and it worked out for Truex the best. Let's take a look at the top 20 finishing results right there and point out some notables. Martin Truex Jr. obviously getting the win. That is important because he did not have a great race at Michigan. Remember, after he won at Pocono, we thought he's definitely the third name in that, you know, championship hunt. Harvick, Busch, and then probably Truex. And then he went to Michigan, which is your standard 2-mile oval, and really did not run well at all. So for him to bounce back, I know we had the off week, but for him to bounce back and get a win here at Sonoma, that's definitely a confidence booster for not just their team, but probably for a lot of fans too, that I'm once again confident in saying that Martin Truex Jr. is probably the third best team right now. You look at that top 5, not too surprising. Kevin Harvick, you know, he's been great at every track. Of course he'd be great at Sonoma. Clint Bowyer, who's been pretty good this year, also been great at Sonoma. He was my pick to win the race, finished third, good day for him. 5th place, Kyle Busch. I just said he's one of the championship favorites. So the usual championship favorites were good again. But this is something I did not see coming. Some young drivers, the young guns, actually had good days at Sonoma, of all places. Chase Elliott finished 4th. I mean, I know he's an okay road racer, but I didn't expect this. Eric Jones and Alex Bowman both in the top 10. I mean, Eric Jones in the top 10? This dude, what happened? Good pitch strategy and a decent race car. Even Eric Jones can run top 10. So I was impressed with Bowman, with Jones, even with Daniel Suarez. I know he finished 15th there, but he had some good strategy. Looked like he might get a top 10 out of the day. So I was even a little impressed with him. I'll throw Chris Buescher's name into the pile there in 12th place finish. Solid day for that team. About as good as it gets. You know, at least one of the JTG cars had a good day. So while 2 weeks ago at Michigan, I was kind of disappointed because I thought the young drivers, I thought that was their race to really make a name for themselves. Turns out Sonoma actually has me feeling a little more confident about some of these guys. Who knew? I'll talk more later this week when I'm back in Austin in my usual setup and usual studio. I'll talk a little bit more about this race and some of the predictions and looking ahead to next week. But this was a good race, and I was very disappointed by the fact that a lot of fans are continuing to complain about this race. I go on Twitter after the race and I was braced for the worst, because anytime a guy wins by 15 seconds or however Truex did, no matter how he did it, you know there's going to be a ton of people complaining and calling for the end of everything as we know it. And that's exactly what I saw. And it's just, I don't know what to say. I've said this many times on this show. NASCAR fans are 100% split on every issue. Here's a race that was interesting. It didn't have the big crashes. It was a race where the best car, best team, and the best strategy won the race. They outdrove, outran, outsmarted their opponents, got the win, and we still saw a lot of interesting passes. We saw technical failures. We saw heartbreak with Allmendinger. It still had a little bit of everything. It just didn't have big wrecks or, you know, a late race caution or pass for the lead. And there's a lot of fans that say, oh, NASCAR doesn't need that to be exciting. And where are you guys at? You guys should be speaking up loud and proud about how great this race was, because I thought this was not a great race. You know, it's probably a 6 out of 10, but it was a solid race. It's a change of pace from what we usually see with, you know, the typical oval racing. This is a strategy dependent race where it wasn't about restarts late that with big wrecks or something that decided it. It's about who had the best car and who played the best strategy and outsmarted each other. Truex's team straight up outsmarted Rodney Childers and Kevin Harvick's team, and that was the deciding factor. And sometimes that is entertaining. I mean, it's not, you know, a spectacle that is a 3-wide wreck for the lead at Daytona. I'll give you that, but it's still very interesting, and I want the fans, like me, I feel like I like a little bit of all NASCAR racing. I'm not super hard on any one camp, but I want to see the fans that are fans of this style of racing, of the strategy, of the kind of more old school type of NASCAR races. I want those fans to speak up, because this was a pretty good race, especially if you're a fan of that kind of thing. NASCAR's in such a box because they can't please everyone, and unfortunately it seems like no matter what decision they make, people are still 100% split. These cars, the aero package didn't come into play at Sonoma. So if people are going to blame the aero package for the racing, that had nothing to do with the race we saw at Sonoma today. The race we saw at Sonoma today was drivers being pretty talented and not wrecking the car every 5 seconds, and also strategy coming into play. And I don't like to use the word strategy in races because sometimes I think pit strategy is just straight up luck, and there's always a little bit of luck involved in any pit strategy, even in this race. But this was a race where the strategies really made sense, and I thought the strategies were honestly some of the more entertaining aspects of the race, and I thought it really made this a decent race overall. So I don't want to see all the hate about, oh, well, Truex won again. It was so predictable. None of y'all in my last video picked Truex. All of y'all were talking about Harvick or Clint Boyer or AJ Allmendinger or Daniel Suarez. A bunch of comments were talking about. There wasn't a bunch of people storming down my door like, it's Truex gonna win. Truex is gonna win this race. You're blind. So don't give me that whole, it's predictable. I know Truex has won this year already. I know there's 2 or 3 guys that have kind of dominated this season. I know that. But can we sit back and at least kind of appreciate how impressive it is that week in, week out, Harvick, Busch, Truex, even Clint freaking Boyer are continuing to answer each other on a week-to-week basis? I mean, we go to a road course here. We're supposed to be seeing new faces up at the front, but who did we see? We still saw Harvick. We still saw Truex and Boyer and Kyle Busch because they're just that good. So can we take a step back and appreciate that? Maybe it's not the spectacle we want to see every single freaking week, but this was a decent race, and I think we got ourselves a hell of a championship battle that I haven't seen in a long time. So take it for what it's worth. Anyway, that's my rant. I'll have more to say later this week, but thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you, of course, to our Patreon sponsors. Really appreciate the support there. You too can be a Patreon sponsor of Out of the Groove for just $5 a month. You can have your name on every single show, and you can check that link down below. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff for everything you ever want to know about me. Yeah, I'll be back later this week with a new episode. If you missed my parody from last week, I uploaded that. I got some WWE Cup Series stop motion racing in the works, so that'll be up within the next week or so, 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for that as well. Any more announcements? I think I'm good. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see y'all later this week. Have a good one.